Author is funded by the Pacific Northwest Writers Association, supporting writers from pen to publication since 1955. To learn more about the PNWA and their yearly conference, please go to pnwa.org. Hi, this is Bill Kenower of Author Magazine, and I'm here at Third Place Books in Lake Forest Park with Jo Nesbø, author of Phantom. Jo, welcome to Author.
Thank you.
So, Jo, normally I like to begin my interviews by asking writers where they first understood that they were interested in story. But as I understand, for you, you're quite, if I understood correctly, you're quite clear about that, and it began with your father. Is that right? Can you tell me about that?
Well, when I grew up, we used to sit around the dinner table, and we would be three brothers and my father sort of fighting to tell stories. And my father told the best stories and the longest stories.
Yeah.
And I think I understood from a young age on that, you know, they were not necessarily true stories. They were, you know, exaggerations or just write out lies. And but whenever we caught him lying, he would always refer to a German scientist called Sepp Windler, who won the Nobel Prize in 1968, according to my father, for work where he proved that in families where they lie on a regular basis, the average lifespan is 7 years longer than in other families. So you know, I grew up in a family where I was taught that lying is healthy, and telling stories is good.
It's so interesting. You talked about the word you used was competing with your brothers to tell stories. And one of the ways I learned to write, I felt, was by sitting with my family and wanting, when my turn came to tell a story, to make it a good one.
Yeah.
And that sense of almost competition for airtime, I felt served me to teach me to tell to tell it quickly and get to the point. Did you feel that? Was it an education for you in that way or not?
I had a little stutter when I was young. No, and I think that was because I became so stressed, you know, when it was my turn, that I felt I had to tell it like really fast.
Right.
But what I learned was that we would tell the same stories over and over again. You know, whenever my family met, uncles, aunts, grandparents, they would tell, you know, the stories that sort of confirms who you are as a family. You know, we will repeat our stories to confirm that we are who we are. That's what, you know, sort of gives the bonds. That's a family. That's the way I see it. And they would perfect these stories. So it was all about telling the same stories that you had told the last year, but to tell it even a little bit better this time.
And it's so interesting that you go on to write this great series about Harry Hole, and not that each story doesn't have its own conclusion, obviously it does, but part of the beauty of working in a series like this is that it can become about the full life, if the author allows it, that it's more about his evolution through that, not just this one, this one, this one, this one.
Yeah, well...
or maybe you don't see it that way, but it's...
But I do. But I think that it has to... the really long storylines are... you can plan them, but you can't really force them. In the writing process, sometimes you have to deviate from the planned storyline, at least for the... not within the novel. That's
right.
Then I write a plot and I have to stick to that storyline.
You stick to it.
I stick to it.
Harry never says, I got to go this way. And you said, you're
not Harry, but because I know Harry so well as a character.
Okay.
So he will do what I've planned for him to do. But some of the other characters may, when they start talking, act differently from what I had planned. It's just that they take on a life of their own, and there's sort of a gravity to the characters, and you don't really know your characters until they start speaking for some strange reason. And that's why when I write synopsis, now and outlines for the stories, I will always put in pieces of dialogue, just so that I have an idea how the character is going to speak to me.
Because you've learned that you've got to get to know them through dialogue. So,
Yeah.
so you've got to put it down so you have a sense of who they are.
Just make sure
Right.
that they won't, do something I don't want them to do. So I do that now, and by doing that, at the time I'm ready to start writing chapter 1, I know the characters and I know the story. I've told the story at least 3 times. First in a short synopsis of 5 pages, then 10 pages, and the last synopsis will probably be, between 50 and 80 pages. And then I have the feeling that the story is already there. Story has been created. So when I start writing chapter 1, I can tell my readers, to come sit closer, because I have this perfect story for you. And I'm not going to create it, I'm going to retell it, just like my parents and my relatives did,
That's so
I'm
fascinating.
going to tell it all over again. And my only job is to hopefully not do too much damage to this perfect story.
Every author I've spoken to, no matter how much they outline, always, as you said, must leave that room for what speaks to us, that surprises us. And it seems to me you'd be almost cutting off your feet to deny that to speak to you. Because that's often where when you're surprised, if you're surprised, your audience, your readers have got to be surprised.
But still, I think it's better to have a plan and not follow it than to have no
okay.
plan. It's just to have that sort of confidence that you know where you're going. Of course, when you someplace along the way, you realize you've gone in the wrong direction. But in your writing, there's still that feeling that at that time you thought you knew where you were going. You just didn't know you were going in the wrong direction. So I think that, but just having that confidence in your writing, it's important, and it seeps through in a way in the prose.
90% of the novelists I've had a chance to sit down with, no matter if they've won the Pulitzer or if they've published, reach a point in a novel where they go, "Ay, is this going to work?" Do you have that, or does that not happen with you?
Since I plan it, since I have a plan, since I know where I'm going, I know that I could pull it together, that I can, write a novel. But the doubt is, of course, always whether it's going to be a good novel, worthwhile reading, and whether I can top my previous novel. I think that I convince myself that this is a great novel. I think you have to do that, but to what extent I'm totally honest to myself, I'm not sure, because I think as a writer you have to have the the ability to fool yourself. I mean, when you start writing your first book, you have to sort of nurture this crazy idea that you are going to write 400 pages, send it to a publishing house. There will be people there with university degrees in literature who are reading your stuff saying, "This is great, we have to publish this," and they will send it to a printer. You will have a great designer to make a cover for you. You will send the books to journalists who will praise the book. People will pay a lot of money and read every word you've written, probably spend a couple of weeks. And what you expect after that is to get prizes and people coming up to you on the street and thanking you for having written a book. I mean, that's the main idea.
You need
when you
to
sit
nurture
down,
that, right?
you sit down and write chapter 1. This is this is probably what is going to happen.
Right.
And in order to really believe that, I think you have to have the ability to fool yourself.